Hello, everybody. Rick Olling here to talk to you about Philip K. Dick's Man in the High Castle, try to help you with the papers. We'll talk about these things in class too, but here in the video, I'll try to go through a number of different ways of looking at the book that will help you to see it fresh, I hope. It is a tricky book, and I needed to think about it for a long time before I was able to really enjoy what it was up to. All right, so one of the things I think is striking about the book is how it's written. We see the world from 6 different points of view, at least. Characters who have some insight into the world, but nobody sees it entire. Nobody sees the whole world like a clairvoyant, just sees through everything. Even Juliana, one of our most astute characters and thoughtful, never sees through Joe. Why tell a novel in this way? It's confusing. It's frustrating. We don't get the whole truth. Well, Philip K. Dick wants us to feel somewhat powerless in this book. He wants us to say, if we were living under a totalitarian regime where the world was divided between Nazis and the Japanese military regime, we would be at a great disadvantage information-wise. We would only be able to see our small corner of the world. Information would be drastically controlled. Censorship. Yes, in the Japanese district, things are better, um, but still the truth heavily censored. Also, certain characters are content enough in their own lives that they don't really challenge what lies beyond. Mr. Tagomi is the best example of this. He's a good man. He has a good conscience, but he doesn't really ask what lies beyond San Francisco, uh, his own small world. Well, he does at the end, but the book is challenging the way that in the beginning of the book he seems to be mostly concerned about getting a gift for a visiting dignitary, and he isn't so concerned with the condition of the world, uh, divided between two tyrannical powers, as he should be. All right, so here's a view that I think might help a bit. Man in the High Castle is the opposite of Adolf Hitler's memoir Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf is the very long, somewhat exhausting rantings of a beleaguered person who felt that he was the victim of history. He had been humiliated, and Mein Kampf means my struggle. Really should have been called My Triumph because it's all about how he's going to get back. The book is designed to make Adolf Hitler seem like a kind of messiah figure who's rising to get revenge against those he imagined to be his enemies. It hasn't aged well. I've looked into the book and, I've actually found myself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Philip K. Dick's book is so much wiser and so much more likely to appeal to people in the future because it's speculative. It asks questions. It looks at the world from different points of view. It challenges accepted realities. It doesn't have any character going on senselessly, I, like a machine gun. So, I know it seems like a strange contrast, but I want you guys to see that all the values that Hitler assumed for his book, using force and anger and revenge, that's absent in Philip K. Dick's book. He's saying, yeah, where is the anger? Where's the war? It seems like these fascist powers have taken over and everything's calm. Uh, People who have studied fascist societies know that, in fact, that is one of the unsettling aspects of them. Nazi Germany, for people living in Nazi Germany, maybe life did seem a lot quieter than it had in the tumultuous 30s, 20s, and early 1930s. So the old expression, the trains ran on time, right? That's actually somewhat inaccurate, but it gives that idea that in our book, normality, things running pretty smoothly, the train's running on time, so to speak. Of course, people want that in a society, but it is also a sign that the fascists have managed to smother any kind of resistance or protest, right? There are no protests in our book. And yet our book was published in 1962, the height of the civil rights movement. So again, get out of the book a little bit to look into it. What is Philip K. Dick leaving out of the book? Rock and roll, Elvis Presley, certainly Bob Dylan, or other singers and artists in the 1960s who we associate with protest and change, right? None of that is happening in this world. It's kind of gray world. And yet I can see, especially the first time reading through it, that might have been lost on you guys. All right. So the book that I think our book shares more with than Mein Kampf would be John Hersey's great classic Hiroshima, because he tells what happens after this catastrophe for the six survivors of the Hiroshima bombing. Five of whom are Japanese born, one of whom is a German Jesuit priest in Hiroshima. Isn't that kind of what our book is about? It's six people. The catastrophe is that the Germans and Japanese have taken over the world, but life has gone back to normal, as it did in Hiroshima, eventually. Um, and again, we're just something as big as that, you can't see it whole, right? You could, if you could, maybe you could see a way forward. But part of what's scary in our book is that we really have very uncertain and limited information, right? The Nazis were a very secretive regime, and same with the military regime who, around Emperor Hirohito, were the ones who really controlled that world. All right. So let's go to this take on the book. What things at the close of our book, Man in the High Castle, should give the reader a sense of hope, make the reading feel like when you close the book, you think, okay, uh, qualified happiness, qualified success. I think in the end, we're going to win. I think that is what the book is supposed to be signaling to you guys. I think that's why that last scene is a fairly relaxed party scene, almost like they're celebrating the eventual return of democracy. Well, what they're saying is, in this world, it is possible for some upper class, or all Caucasian, right, people to enjoy what appears to be democracy. He's a writer who's successful as a bestseller. Are we supposed to say, oh, well, as long as Mr. Hawthorne of Benson's getting his royalties and is able to have a party and drink his old fashions, then all's right with the world? No, Phil K. Dick is way smarter than that, isn't he? He is, however, saying that certain types of solutions are not going to appear here. Let's go through those first. He does not do what any Hollywood movie would do, which is say, in the next 48 hours, or even starting now, there is a military insurrection that will take back the world from the Japanese and the Germans. Um, some kind of, maybe they probably would, have it be an insurrection within one of those two governments that was clearly going to be taking charge and restoring democracy. That kind of military happy ending most certainly does not happen in the book. The opposite is our concern, that the Nazis plan to do Operation Dandelion, where they plan to attack the Japanese and try to secure total control of the world. Why do I still feel the ending is optimistic if there's not a promised action movie type ending with the military? Nor is there, of course, a Superman ending. Superman came about during World War II, but Philip K. Dick does not want to have a supernatural, super heroic, super unbelievable ending. So, what do we have going for us? Let me go through our three topics and see if I can quickly suggest how all three are promising. The first, the way. I think Philip K. Dick is saying ancient wisdom. People under all sorts of tyrannies, monarchies, autocracies, communist regimes, fascist regimes, have gone to ancient spiritual works, um, novels, art. But in our book, I Ching is the best example. And those things kind of don't worry about the present regime, the usual government. They kind of go on despite those things and people's spiritual struggles. people's inner light that they follow, their inner way, uh, is all individual. And there's something very democratic about that, right? That even the worst ideological police can't hopefully get into our souls. And I feel like even Mr. Tagomi's life with this heart attack and the rest of it is still to me a hopeful ending because he does so much good before the end. So individual way. Second one, heart. I think that Philip K. Dick's best and most happy and most encouraging message is that in our hearts we don't want to be living under fascism or even monarchies had its day, Hirohito and all that stuff. That's yesterday's world. And the oppression of women, we can't go backwards on that. We know too much. We know that we do better when we're all allowed to participate, when it's a level playing field. I mean, democracy's I think, is the most successful experiment ever. And I think he's saying that Pandora's box, can't put it all back in. In the future, states like Nazi Germany and Japan would find it impossible. Juliana is our best example of this, right? A free mind, a free imagination, not wanting to create anarchy, and certainly not wanting to um, commit acts of violence out of rage or anything like that. But Juliana seems to me to become an activist. Uh, if they close the book, she can no longer accept the established order. She's going to have to work to undermine not just the German regime, but also the Japanese regime in some capacity. It may not involve violence at all, or even advocating violence. But is she up on her side, and the ancient wisdom of the I Ching, um, but also just her whole array of values that I think we see in her. All right, here's my last proposal for what we have. I think the most heartening and inspiring imagination in the book, person or being in the book, is this not Hawthorne Benson, but this man, Philip K. Dick, who wrote the book and who in 1962 wasn't a famous household name. Um, he's given me the most promise for the future because his book is so clever. He outsmarts the Germans, he outsmarts the Japanese autocrats. He shows how the human survives. He writes a book with as little violence as he can because he knows that violence is in fact the weapon of tyrants. When they can't defeat you with ideas or the truth or goodness, uh, then they have to come shoot you. So I think the book is a wonder, but you have to think about it a little bit and think there's a consciousness, a kind of spirit to the Man in the High Castle. That's the best argument, really, uh, against what they're fighting in the book. That closed-mindedness, closed heart. That you can hear of rumors of Holocausts in Africa and say, well, that's a different world than ours. Uh, Mr. Dagomia is one of the characters who brushes that off. Mr. Childane as well. So Phil K. Dick is very clever here, right? He's saying ordinary people who say, well, they came for them, but they weren't coming for me. So I thought, well, I can live with this, right? So he's very good at saying, uh, and when they come for you, uh, repeat for me what your argument was. All right, we'll talk about all this in class.